Hola, buen día. Como dijo Graciela, ahora voy a presentar a Carolyn, después a Maristela y al finalizar abriremos las preguntas para todos y todas. Primero, acá hay más lugar, si están parados, si quieren pasar por este lado, pueden sentarse por acá. Carolyn Christov-Bakargiev es escritora e investigadora en prácticas artísticas, historiadora del arte y políticas estéticas. Es directora del Castello di Rivoli, Museo de Arte Contemporáneo en Turín, Italia. Coordinó la edición número 14 de la Bienal de Estambul en 2015, llamada Agua Salada, y fue directora de la edición 2012 de Documenta 13. En 2008 fue la directora artística de Revoluciones, Formas que Giran, la 16ª Bienal de Sydney. Entre 2001 y 2007 fue la curadora del Castello di Rivoli y entre 1999 y 2001 fue curadora senior en PS1 del MoMA en Nueva York.
Posso parlarvi o in italiano o in inglese, ma in spagnolo no, e quindi credo che ci sia la traduzione qui simultanea e quindi parlerò in inglese. Of course, I know, I was just saying that it has to be in English. Okay, so I'd like to thank everybody for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I need to turn this on. PowerPoint? The PowerPoint? Okay. So I believe that Graciela mentioned Documenta 13, and I believe that the reason why I was invited here is because of some of the aspects of that project. And I have half an hour to speak to you, and that's not very long in terms of the questions at hand, which are quite major questions that you are bringing up in this seminar. It is, and I was also asked to speak about how I feel about questions like the problems of the ecology in the world today and the relationship between art and these problems, and how I feel about that after so many years. In fact, these subjects have not been the primary focus. They have been indirect focus of subsequent projects. And that is because I tend to be a skeptic, and as Adorno was. And when something is nominated, usually it changes completely what it was that you were attempting to nominate. So to nominate the problem of the Anthropocene is in itself creating a new problem, which is a problem of a narcissism for the human species again, because the narcissism brings, can be implied in the power of saying that a geological age has come, a new one caused by one species on the planet. And as any biologist knows, the planet, even though the humans and many other species would be extinct, but after a very short amount of time, the planet would be fine without humans. So it's a little bit difficult, I think, to speak in terms of a scene, you know, which in any case, this term appeared around 1971 in fields that were not close to the arts, and then I suppose reappeared in the arts at about the time when I was doing this Documenta. And in fact, I am self-critical insofar that having published the 100 notes, which you see some examples of the covers of, 100 notes, 100 thoughts as a kind of expanded catalog that was also a catalog made of chapters where each chapter somehow incorporated reflections on the previous chapters, like in a chain. that project was also responsible for bringing to the attention of the so-called art world this term, with the publication of Jill Bennett's notebook number 53 called Living in the Anthropocene. But other publications in the 100 Notes, 100 Thoughts, were very important to the discussions at Documenta 13. For example, Vandana Shiva's The Corporate Control of Life, which spoke about the birth of artificial life with GMO experiments with Charabrakti in 1976 beginning and so forth. And also Donna Haraway was a very important inspiration for the Documenta 13, to whom we dedicated a space, which was a house called the Worldly House. And her notebook, Speculative Fabulation and String Figures, also was quite important for the project in terms of thinking through questions of symbiotic relations and storytelling. Jill Bennett, of course, we just mentioned, and one of the other notebooks of the 100, there were many more. Claire Pentecost on Brian Holmes, I.L. Weissman, many notebooks were published. But I just pulled out these 4 because they relate more directly and immediately to the topic at hand today. So Karen Barad was also a great inspiration for the Documenta in our preparations leading up to it between 2009, 10 to 2012. And her notebook was one of the last ones, number 99, What is the Measure of Nothingness, Infinity, Virtuality, and Justice? I chose to close the series with a republication of an early text by a very unpopular thinker nowadays, which is Rudolf Arnheim, for a number of reasons relating to the problem of form. So, in asking me to think about the differences between then and now, I wanted to list a number of differences that I perceive in the world nowadays. But as a premise, I must tell you that in all of my work throughout the last 30 years, there's been a preconception, and there is always an a priori, at least one, if not many a prioris, entangled a prioris. But one of them has been the a priori that what I would do with artists and in exhibition making had to relate to the flourishing of life on the planet. Of course, that statement is very fraught today because of the nature of the difficulty of defining the word life. Today, what I see today is a return to a debate, a very old debate, which is a binary debate, and it is the debate between artificial life as opposed to natural life. And industry and government and companies and many people that are working today in the world, also in the digital world, are returning to this very patriarchal, male, I think, old binary thinking that doesn't really support the flourishing of life on the planet. It's old because we have stories around the automata and the loss of agency in antiquity and myths almost all over the planet. So I wrote as a title to this talk that one of the questions would be to get out of this binary discussion between AI and HI, between human intelligence and artificial intelligence, through a process of threeing, therefore, with non-human intelligences. So by threeing, as Bateson had, an old thinker of the cybernetics period, followed by Paul Ryan in his theory of threeing, positions action, reaction, and waiting as 3 positions as opposed to 2. In a way, this allows for forms of escape. Escape from, of course, questions of resolution and visibility, and escapes that many artists and thinkers around the world, such as people who were not in the Documenta, but who are very important, also are working on nowadays. So at the time of doing the Documenta, I was dismissed as a kind of mad woman on the front page of the newspaper of Munich with a strawberry, you know, and they said she wants strawberries to vote, and indeed I do, you know, indeed I do, and it has to do, of course, with questions of representation and reinventing democracy through different forms of coefficients, which are connected with different life experiences and abilities and knowledges of different people. So then and now, so 6 years have passed, or 7 years. And at the time, there was, of course, the digital revolution, but Web 4.0, so-called Web 4.0, based on profiling individuals and the celebration of the singularity of each individual, had not yet fully set in. There was not yet the concentration of financial power the way there is now due to the attention economy and the algorithms that destroy the biodiversity of economies. Old stamps are obsolete, the stamps we have on letters, but and the art market of stamps has fallen nowadays, but they aren't really obsolete. And in so far as the value of communications is what's being counted, the value, the number of hits that something arrives at, and the labor is in the producing these number of hits. And therefore, this attention economy has brought in the authoritarian derives in the Western world, in particular, and in the Northern world, that had been not present for a little while. I don't know so well the political situations of other places, so I speak mostly of where I am and my situated experience in Italy, of course, and looking at America and Brexit and so forth. And the refugee crisis was there, but it wasn't as bad as it seems now to appear. Provenance. Provenance had not yet, oops, goodness, it went away. Okay. Provenance had not yet been liquidated from the establishment of value as it has today after the sale of Salvator Mundi in 2017. A painting by Modigliani at the time was worth 2.5 million euros. Then it went up to 25, and now it's worth 150 million euros. And the Salvator Mundi went from $10, we know, to 100 million in a sale of 2011, just before Documenta opened, to 450 million in the last auction. And this is related to the collapse of provenance as attributing value to an artwork. Provenance studies. It's like the detachment of the dollar from the gold. When that happened, is the detachment of the artwork from the sale of the artworks. In the sense that if Boltraffio even saw a little bit of this canvas, it's a lot. And it's mainly been painted by Daniela Modestini, who is an art restorer who was working for the Crest Foundation, is currently living in Florence, and painted it for over 6 years. But I wanted to go back to that picture. There was at the time a resistance to biopolitics, and now there's an economy of necropolitics. There were at the time ecofeminists like Vandana Shiva and so on, and many other, Carolyn Marchand, many other. And now there is the Me Too movement. There was the crisis of Renaissance perspective and an idea of folded space and time and multiple perspectives. And now there's the bubble vision, the 360-degree closed vision of the Google glasses. There was slow food at the time and soil research, much work being done. And now there is a lot of work being done in hydroponic agriculture, water is being opposed to soil instead of being in relation to soil. And this clearly connects to a rejection of mud, and what Haraway says, we are creatures of the mud, at the beginning of her book. It relates to a fear of dirtiness and microbes and viruses, as opposed to seeing viruses and bacteria as an essential part of composting and the ecosystem. And it fundamentally relates to the fear of death, which returns in the return to the binary opposition between the robot and the human. So today, pro-technology people are associating artificial intelligence with creativity, creating factories where humans work for the AI. It's a little bit of a reversal, where the slaves are the humans. The farms for the startups, offering small companies funds to develop digital apps that will produce new automated services and wealth, like the Airbnbs or the self-driven cars, the Dropbox, the delivery of goods by drones, the Ubers, the incubator hubs, accelerators, Station F in Paris, H-Farm in Treviso, Talent Garden in Milano, all part of Google for Entrepreneurs, Y Combinator, Level 39 in London, and so on. If reflected in a number of exhibitions that have been done. And this is a kind of a Web 4.0 version of the old factory, of the old Fordist factory, because it implies a kind of intense aggregation of people in a working place, which is very much like the old factory. Often they are being built in old factories that are being refurbished for that purpose. And they are based on the idea that creating places that foster relations and sharing of knowledges in an embodied way will allow for the connecting of human brains in a more creative way than having people dislocated in different parts of the world combining their labor to produce one result. So I think it's a little bit like a blockchain cognitive labor factory. And surely this will happen, So I think that much of what needs to happen is the regulation, as in the revolution, industrial revolution, there needed to be a form of regulation, at least the 8-hour day, a certain number of elements. So against this, there are neo-ruralist movements, like in the late 19th century, when the Monte Verità started, with anarchists dropping out of society and moving to Ascona in favor of withdrawal and resistance. There are pockets of biodynamic agriculture and neo-materialists, like you were speaking, that we can see the rise in ceramics in art, the idea of touching sculpture that's not digitally printed, brick making, Adrian Villaroja's work with brick making in the north of Rosario since the late 2000s. Now, one of the big debates in the AI is if AI will wipe humans out and due to self-learning machines that, if properly programmed, will clearly see that the only way to solve the problems of this ecological crisis is through the reduction of the population, human population on the planet. This is more or less what Yuval Harari writes about in his Homo Deus. But I'm not so sure that that is truly a risk, as much as it is a kind of desired wish on the part of this wish to eradicate the composting, which means the wish to eradicating the woman. So I'm going to show you some pictures, I hope, of things that are worrisome. Then I'll show you documenta for all of you who haven't seen the documenta. And then I'd like to end this talk with the question of women hating today. And how recently been reading Jacqueline Rose's book, Mothers, an Essay on Love and Cruelty. And I think that the rise in violence against women today is, which happens all over the world, whether for religious reasons like Hindu fundamentalists in India raping small children, or in terms of abuse of power in work relations in the north of the world, is deeply intertwined with the question of a psychoanalytically relevant desire on the part of basically a fundamentally male technology to liberate life from the womb, from the necessity of the womb, of being born in the womb, because it is harder to deal with being, having been so fragile in the arms of the mother if you do not have a womb in the body yourself. So I'd like to show you some of the slides quickly, because it's this is like a summary of a seminar of 10 days or something. But this piece was made by Sam Durant for the Documenta 13, and it was some of many scaffolds where people had been assassinated by societies, public assassinations. And it traveled through Europe after the Documenta, and when it finally found a home, it was acquired by the Walker Art Center. It ran into the negative judgment of Dakota, a group of Dakota Sioux people who considered it a violent representation of what had happened to 38 Sioux people who had been killed, amongst the references that Sam Durant made in the piece. And Sam, being a soul, quite a soft soul, had his discussions with the people who complained about the work, and the work was destroyed in 2017. So I think about this a lot. I think about the rise of ethno-fascisms, and I think about the fact that it is very difficult to speak now against the speaking against, the speaking against, the speaking against. And the difficulty in speaking for those who speak for, and who speak for. So we are, of course, in this a digital age of so many words, but these so many words must somehow never be spoken outside of the small community of attention, which reconfirms the preconceptions onto which those freedoms are based. So I'm not sure that we have gained in freedom by the destruction of this work, but if the story of the destruction of this work can be discussed, can be opened up and unpackaged, then I think there's a way forward. So this we already spoke about. This is the question of art exhibition making. I mean, all the practice that somehow we do is in a relation between the inside and the outside of the world that is not constituting an inside and the outside. This is a typical topological shape, which is a continuous shape, non-orientable, like a Möbius strip 3D. And all the projects have been based on this form, which is why the Documenta notebooks ended with Arnhem. This is somebody in a plane that I think could illustrate what we were trying to speak about in this INMINENCIA, which is an interesting title, imminence, because it takes us out of the word immanence, which has been a dominant term from Deleuze for the last 30 years. And I think it's about time that that also be questioned in terms of the binary that it positioned between the so-called transcendent world and the so-called real world. So I like the turn to the imminence. So just some pictures more for those who did not come to Documenta. It didn't take place only in Kassel. It took place also in Kabul, Alexandria, Cairo, and Banff for a number of reasons. This was the original sketch for the concept of the Documenta, with all the questions of the Klein bottle that I was trying to work out with a number of friends and people and artists and thinkers. This is the Klein bottle again in another version. It's a photograph that inspired also the Documenta of a kind of triangulation and constitution of threeing with the presence of the Julio Gonzalez in a 1959 Documenta, the woman barefoot and the man in some sort of winter clothes, and this triangulation and constant escape from closure that was attempted in the exhibition as a whole. This was not the model of Documenta. It is an archive. And this was the model of a Documenta. It is the compost, which produces this. And one composting place was in the Fridericianum. It was the so-called brain. I was thinking of the early Cabinet des Miracles as well, but reversing the centripetal movement from outside inside, bringing all the wonders of the world to a place of the typical Renaissance and then 18th century Wunderkammer. And it became a centrifugal space defined by a glass. Centrifugal because of the relations that were set between the elements inside the brain and the world at large. And from the inside, you could read in the middle of the middle of the middle, right side up on the glass. That was Lawrence Wiener's contribution to remind us of how this whole structure of it was centrifugal. That's a more close-up version of it. This was the Donna Haraway Worldly House, which contained the stories that we want to tell each other. What stories do we tell so that the stories can open up to more stories? And they were stories of human and non-human coevolution, human and non-human symbiotic relations, computers and ducks. It's a house for ducks. This was Rosemary Truckle's proposition. On the one hand, a closed house, and on the other, a transparent house. I show this, I don't remember why I showed it, but I just thought you should see at least two of the Documenta houses. This is just, I wanted to remind you, I like touching mud, and not necessarily, copyrighted gestures of touching, like touchscreen. This was the source for the little houses of the Documenta. It's a picture of the Monte Verita. The Theosophists were amongst the first cosmopoliticians. Madame Blavatsky and Annie Besant moved a lot and tried to bridge both issues around ecology, issues of relations between different sets of mythologies around the world, and theosophical architecture had a lot to do with the birth of vegetarianism, the birth of many, many questions, but that were at the source of, and it was quite a strong movement in the late 19th century that then with other movements, Fabian, she was actually a Fabian socialist, Annie Besant, before becoming a theosophist after reviewing a book of Madame Blavatsky, but other movements such that were not concerned, that did not want to be concerned with mythologies and religions as much, such as the different socialist movements, Marx and Engels also, they moved the attention away from a certain more cosmopolitical view that the theosophists were creating. Anyway, one of the is there somebody with a paper? We will hold up a paper, right? There's someone with a paper. Oh, good. So that's okay, so I won't go overboard. This is back to the brain. One of the lines of flight from the brain connected to the Bamyan Buddhas that had been destroyed after in the 90s actually, throughout the 90s. And what we organized in Bamyan was with Michael Rakowitz's workshops to get out of the binary problem of shall we redo the Buddhas, which is 90% of the population of Bamyan wants to remake the Buddhas, or wanted at the time. And UNESCO, 90% of the Western conservationists thinkers did not want to remake the Buddhas because in Western philosophy, the original materials and the original craft is important, and so it mustn't be completely rebuilt. That was a battle going on, so what we did was to loosen it up a little bit, and Michael Rakowitz proposed a workshop for stone carving so that everybody could just go down the hill and make another, carve an iPad if they wanted to, or carve their dog if they wanted to. And we would be out of this problem of authority on whether you should redo the Buddhas or not. Some of these stones in front appeared out of the blue after the workshop in a few months later, and so there's a kind of opening up of possibilities of stories. This was in the brain as well. It's destroyed artifacts in Lebanon during the Lebanese civil wars, as well as Etel Adnan's pellet knife, and Morandi trying to calm things down during fascism, and Lee Miller photographing the horrors of Dachau at the end of it. The small Bactrian princesses that are, there are about 80 of them surviving in the world today. There may have been hundreds of thousands of them. Their characteristic is that they are made like of different parts that get held together precariously. And so they are somehow a hymn and a celebration to the possibility of care, because some of them have been together for thousands of years, as well as to the possibility of not care, because there's only 80 of them. Kassel during World War II, the first documenta, Mr. Pollock, Mr. Boyce. Why I did this, I can't quite remember, but I wanted to tell you that many issues are very old issues of artworks attempting to not just illustrate problems, but also to propose actual engagements. Oiticikas giving the earth back to the earth. Cunellis, Pinones, the tree will grow everywhere except here. Pinone and Arte Povera in general have been a very important inspiration for my work, being my mother Piedmontese, and they are from Piedmont. The same tree that was in Kassel with the rock was also, this is how in Kassel we were cutting the grass. But that same tree was also in Sydney some years prior, so that if you imagine the planet with the tree planted twice through time, it tells a lot about the way that art informs cat's cradle together. Of course, I thought I would explain that with Piero Manzoni for a moment, so you might understand what it meant to do that gesture of reversing the Pennone tree from Sydney to Kassel. Adrian Villarojas in Kassel, in the terraces that had been the house of the man who had a company of arms producers. 5 minutes left. Okay, so this is in Kabul. It looks like the Fridericianum. Artists, Francis Salis and all these people thinking together. Penone's piece in the Kabul Gardens. Adrian Villarojas' piece in there. Sydney, this is research for the document. I can't explain it to you. This is I was with Fajvovic and Goldberg, and we were digging up meteorites. They are here today. And looking at GMOs fields. They were also ended up doing a project which also problematized different cultural relations with the Taco and the Chaco project, but I can't explain it now. They will tomorrow, I hope, do what they can. This is doing fundamental research with Amar Kanvar in Abu Dhabi, trying to figure out what the Guggenheim was doing, and then Amar Kanvar's projects. I'm going to just skip the seeds. There was a section in Documenta called, when you look inside, you see that it is filled with seeds. That's where most of these projects somehow hovered around. Mark Dion's work on the collection of seeds in the seed banks in the 1700s is a little bit like today, collecting DNA. Otolith group